Hi, everyone, and welcome to the DevSecOps track. My name is Lars Lefevre, and I'm a volunteer in the OWASP community, and I'll be moderating this session. So during the next 45 minutes, we'll hear John DiLeo and Seba Deleersnyder talk about the OWASP SAMM project. So please submit any questions you have during this session in the Q&A tab, and I'll be asking our speakers your questions in the last 10 minutes. So let me introduce John and Seba. John is the New Zealand OWASP chapter lead and is on the core team of the OWASP SAMM project. He's currently leading the software assurance advisory practice at Datacom New Zealand. Seba is the co-founder and CTO of Torion. He started the OWASP Belgian chapter and was a member of the OWASP Foundation board. He's also one of the co-leaders of the SAMM projects. And now he's adopting application security models to the evolving fields of DevOps and is also focused on bringing threat modeling to the wider audience. And with that, I'll hand over the word to John and Seba. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Lars. Hi, John.
Lars.
All right. So thank you all for joining this track. We'll be talking about an hour and demoing the SAMM project. And as Lars said, don't be afraid to put your questions in the chat or on the WOVA, I would say, application. We'll leave enough room, and we'll take about 40 minutes or so to present the project and demo the project, and we'll leave enough room for Q&A. So with that, I'll be sharing my screen. If everything goes fine, you should be able to see a presentation, which I'm going to start right now. So we're going to present to you the project called OWASP SAMM. Now, John will already present it. Hi, John, and myself. Our contact details are also on the last slide. So if you want to reach out to John or myself, don't hesitate to do that. But we're here for SAMM. So what is SAMM actually? SAMM is what's called the software assurance maturity model. So it's a maturity model that really provides a effective and above all measurable way for all types of organizations to not only analyze where you are in terms of software security practices, but also to improve that. And that's really where SAMM shines. It makes what you're doing in your AppSec pipelines, in your CI/CD pipelines measurable. It makes it actionable. It really provides you with a lot of pointers to what you can do. And also understand that SAMM itself is versatile and like technology, process, or organization agnostic. So you can obviously apply this on a DevOps practice, but even for waterfall or agile or other ways of programming, SAMM is definitely something you can and should use as, I would say, the open source secure development lifecycle framework. Everything we show here and also show that afterwards is also available on our website, owaspsamm.org. Anything to add to that, John?
No, well, I think you did mention about how it's most beneficial as a tool for figuring out how you're going to improve your posture. One of the things I find we often have to help people understand is that you go through a SAMM assessment not to obtain some objective score, get a stamp of approval, hang something on the wall. It's really to understand where you are now. And you understand where you are now so you can decide where you'd like to be in 6 months, in 12 months. And that's really what's important and how the SAMM framework is most valuable.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for adding that. Now, why do we need such a thing as SAMM? And you're all joining the I would say the OWASP conference, so you're aware of adding security activities to a secure development lifecycle. But it's really about, okay, how do we do that? How do we when we look at designing, building, testing, and deploying software in a production environment, how can we add more proactive security controls to those pipelines or your process, where certainly I would say the less mature or people who are just starting with security start with pen testing or scanning their code and then patching that. A more proactive way is looking, okay, what kind of requirements do I need to address or include in my user stories or my next release? What kind of threat modeling should I do? Coding guidelines, and so on. There's lots of activities that you can add and should add really as part of your development, especially also with DevOps, as that's much quicker in terms of timing and frequency than the more traditional way of programming. It's really crucial to embed those activities, those security activities, as part of the development process. So that's the whole background of why we need a more structured way of deciding, okay, what kind of activities do we need to add and where do we add them, in what kind of order do we need to add them, where are we really in terms of security activities, and that's where SAMM comes into place and into play. And it's a maturity model. And why is it a maturity model? So actually, there's a couple of aspects that we need to take into account. When you start adding security activities to a secure development or to a development lifecycle, any lifecycle, it introduces change. You're going to change a little bit how you're going to work within your DevOps team or development team or your squad or whatever scope that you're working on. And so change is something that you don't do overnight. So you need to have an iterative way of changing the way that you're working. You're not going to do everything different from one day to the other. Also, you need to understand that when you look at SAMM later on, there's lots of stuff that you can do. And I would say there's guidance, especially also on the website, but there is no single way of doing this. So there is not you need to do this first, then that, and then so there's different ways to leading you to the maturity level that you need to get to or want to get to. And what's key there is that, and that's something that's built into the model, is that it should be risk-based. So based on your software risk profile, your risk appetite, you should look at, okay, what's enough in terms of activities for us as a team or as an organization. And also there's, you need to understand not only yourself as I would say, as a developer in the team, but also as a product owner or as a stakeholder or as a business analyst. Okay, what do we need? What are we adding here especially? And there, in this case, the framework, the SAMM framework, provides enough information to actually describe what kind of activities that you can or should be adding. And what makes SAMM especially interesting as a maturity model is that it makes your activities, what you're going to add, measurable in terms of maturity. And then it's really about if you can measure it, you can manage it. And that's where SAMM helps you to measure where you are and help you to create a roadmap and to also to demonstrate that you're improving the way of working, and that's a key aspect to that. Anything there, John, to add from your side? Just chip in.
We had the SAMM community call. What was this morning for me, last night in Europe, and the question was asked, okay, we did a baseline assessment. What does SAMM tell us to work on next? And it all comes back to that second bullet. It depends. What does your organization perceive as your biggest areas of risk? What are those areas that your C-suite, that your board are most concerned about seeing improvement in? Because they'll drive your priorities. And ultimately, as was pointed out by one of the participants this morning, all of this is about driving down risk. So you're going to use SAMM as a framework to help you understand where you have gaps and then look at how closing those gaps can help improve your risk posture. So there is no one answer. It's very much based on what's going on in your organization, your industry.
Indeed. All right. So a little bit of background history. So where we came from. So originally, SAMM started as Open SAMM, was created by a very smart guy, Pravir Chandra, about like already 13 years ago. Donated by him and at the time then called Fortify to OWASP Foundation. And then within OWASP, we took that over and we started to work on the project itself and improving it. And hence the name change. It's now really called OWASP SAMM. We've added a couple of like updates, version 1.1. We did some drastic changes in the way of scoring, which resulted in version 1.5. And then we did a complete revamp of the SAMM structure and framework towards 2.0, which we're working on since 2020. Now, how does it look like? So we've organized all the different activities in security practices that are really grouped in what we call business functions. And business functions are how do you organize the different security activities as part of a governance business function? How do you add design activities? How do you add implementations activities? Verification, obviously, you want to have a lot of test and verification in there. And obviously also how do you operate your software and the security activities in there. So there's 5 what we call business functions. And in each of these business functions, you have 3 security practices. And so for instance, strategy and metrics is something that belongs in governance. Or for instance, requirements or security testing is something that fits into the verification business function. And so in total, we have 15 security practices. And each of these security practices are made, there's security activities in there that you can and should, I would say, consider to add to your way of working. Some of them might be very useful, some of them might be less useful for you. So it really depends on what you're developing and what kind of risk profile that you're working on. Now, if we blow that up and blow that up even bigger towards you, then you see that in these 5 business functions, the governance, the implementation, and so on, you have the security practices, and each of the security practices has what we call 2 streams. These are activities, like for instance, if we look at security testing, here at the bottom right, you have a scalable baseline, so like adding like automation and testing to your CI/CD pipeline, and for instance, also deep understanding. So this is manual testing to look for security issues in your code. And so you see that each of the security practices is built out of 2 streams. So for each of these activities, we have a clear objective. What do we want to get out of that? What's the benefit of doing that? A description, obviously, of that activity. For instance, like security testing, what is it? There's pen testing in there with a clear description. And also a question about, okay, how are you doing this? Because later on, remember, this is a maturity model. You need to be able to see, okay, are we doing this activity or not? And something that came with 2.0, we also added quality criteria to make sure that indeed you're verifying the correct maturity level of your activity. If you do a deep dive on security practice structure here, in this case, the control verification and the misuse abuse testing, this is the part of the requirements-driven testing. So this is part of the business function verification. So there's 2 streams in there. So how does this work? We have the maturity level. There's 3 maturity levels. Actually, there's 4 maturity levels in SAMM. There's 0. You're not doing it, which can be valid, but in most of the cases, you should be doing something. In this case, like requirements-driven testing, your software has to have like probably some security built in. You have to have an ID somewhere. Okay, what kind of security? That's the requirements part, and that's actually another security practice that can drive this. And there's then the 3 levels. So level 1 is more like the very ad hoc activity of verifying your security requirements in a way that they are implemented in your software. Level 2 is that you're doing this in a more structured way, you're also tying it really to the kind of software and the requirements that are important for your software. And that's in general also the level 2 maturity of the other security practices as well. And level 3 is that actually you have a feedback loop and that you learn from what you're doing. And that's the highest level of maturity. Typically, there is also links and ties to other parts in the model. And let me also be clear, in most of the cases, a lot of organizations don't need to get to a level 3. It might be that for you, level 1 is more than enough for your piece of software or your functionality in terms of what you're doing, and that's enough. Depending on the kind of software that you're building, if it's a piece of software that controls a nuclear reactor, you probably might need to get to a level 2 or 3. If it's to order software, if it's software to order lunches, to order sandwiches over lunch for your colleagues, and you're only using it internally, okay, you see that the risk profile is much lower. So, and that's really where you'll have to adapt the level of maturity towards the risk profile of your software. So that's the maturity, and we're going to measure always the maturity level of your security practices. Now, what we see here is we have the 2 streams. In this case, security requirements-driven or requirements-driven testing, there's 2 streams in there. There's a more what we call like positive stream, like we verify the security controls that we've built in, like are we actually doing authentication and so on. Whereas there's a second stream that's more like the misuse, abuse testing, that's more focused like on fuzzing, doing abuse case testing and so on. We're not going to explain in detail how the security practice works here. There's a full 1 or 2 day training if you want to, I would say, do that. But that's the structure. You have 2 streams, and then each of these streams have the activities in there that are described with their own objective and their own related question to that specific activity in that security practice stream. So that's actually how the overall structure of a security practice works. And if you understand this, you understand the model. And because the model really is built out of these 15 different security practices, and each of them have these obviously 3 levels, the streams and the activities explained. Anything else I've missed here, John?
Well, there was just one detail I wanted to pick up on as you were talking about. And we've talked a couple times about, for your organization, your target may not be level 3 in a given stream or within a given practice. One of the wonderful things about working with SAMM is that it gives you these activities to talk about. And when I'm doing a guided assessment with an organization, I'm saying in each of these activities, how are you doing this now? What do you have in place? And then really there's the question, is what you're doing, in your opinion, good enough to meet your needs? So that even when you decide we're not going to implement that activity, we're not going to worry about, in particular, say one of these level 3 activities, you've made that intentional decision, having thought about your current state and what you really need, rather than it simply being a sin of omission that we just never really thought about it, so we're not doing it. And even that is a big value add for an organization, to have made the conscious decision and to have that their reasoning captured.
Exactly. All right. Yeah, thank you. So I also already mentioned questions. So I'll show you how how we can find back those questions. So here we see, there's an assessment toolbox. Toolbox is like a nice name for actually a spreadsheet. We also have now an application for that, which John will show as well. But so for each level and each activity, there's a certain question, and there's quality criteria that support those questions. And there's also, like I said, I'll demonstrate the toolbox just after the presentation. But there's also a web app, a single page web app, but John can explain what it's about.
Okay, sure. So my team, and as Lars mentioned when I was introduced, I'm at Datacom New Zealand. And within the organization, I'm actually in the application security services team. So we do Internally, we help our teams make sure that they've got these practices in place. And then externally, I lead the software assurance practice, and we do a lot of SAMM assessments. Now, one of the things that I have always wanted for us to have is the ability to move away from an Excel workbook and to a web-based tool that would let us do assessments on our browser, and then within an organization to pull those assessments into a central repository, be able to look at them on a dashboard, and then also look at assessments over time. Well, the first piece of that is to get a UI. And I was able to get some release time within my team to put together a minimum viable product of a single page application UI for entering an assessment. This is no more functionally than one of the tabs in the Excel workbook currently, but it's there as a starting point to try and get to some of these more broad enterprise features. So toward the end of our session, I'll go through a brief demo of what the app currently is and does.
All right, great. And thanks for that. So we typically start with the assessment. So there's a quick start guide. There's a quick start guide also. I'll go through that over the website. But typically, the assessment is not the goal. The goal is to reach or to improve your overall maturity over a certain couple of points. So you set a target, you define a plan, you implement, you roll it out. I'll show you in a couple of minutes on the website where there's more detail to actually do that. So there's guidance there as well. Where can we all find this? Everything in terms of documents, presentations, trainings, we have a shared Google Drive. Everything in terms of projects, I would say underpinning materials are in GitHub, and actually also the website is a GitHub website built actually automatically from every change that we do on the model. It will generate the website and everything else, and obviously the website itself. Now, it's something that actually helped us a lot to generate to create the updated version of SAMM, and also to create, I would say, follow-up releases, because we're not only at 2.0, we're actually at 2.0.4. Every time we see a typo or we need to fix something, for instance, there was a small bug in the Excel spreadsheet, we can now push that through the GitHub and then release that through small releases from the GitHub towards the different channels, the website, the toolbox, the applications, and so on. So I'll show that later on. There's a whole, I have our own DevOps, I would say, cycle. It's like we're not releasing every day, that's not, but we have our own CI/CD pipeline. Underpinning the framework, these are all YAML files. If you do a change there, it's pushed and it's pushed in the GitHub and committed. There's a verification in terms of formatting. The markdown is being generated to push towards the website. It's being built and deployed then also towards the website as well. So it's something to that helps us a lot to iterate or update the model much faster than in the past. Also, we are working on translating the website itself and the model itself to different languages. So there's different translations ongoing. We're using the Crowdin platform for that. And if you're watching this and you speak one of these languages, or you want to have the SAMM translated in one of your own languages in your own organization or your own country, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to facilitate that. Once we have a full translation of the model, we'll also make the website multi-language so that you can toggle between the different languages. I also pointed out a little bit, we have full training slides, but you also have a train the trainer package. So if within your organization you have multiple people or multiple teams that you want to have trained on this, also feel free to reach out to us there as well. I'll point you in the Google Drive to the materials. And last but not least, so once you're starting to work on SAMM yourself, you'll also have probably the question coming up like, okay, that's all good and fine. We know where we are, we know where we want to get, but how do I compare to others? How do I compare to my peers? And that's the SAMM benchmark track. And Brian Glass, he's already with us for, I would say, the most part of the project, has quite some experience with that kind of task. He has been involved in the OWASP Top 10 also to gather all those data points. And so he's working on the first MVP of a SAMM benchmark. Now, for that SAMM benchmark, actually, where we'll be able to compare ourselves to, I would say, a minimal data set of other measurements for other organizations, we need to bootstrap that. So if you have, and if you can have or you can share your own data set, please reach out to Brian. At this stage, he is accepting data sets by email, but obviously once we have a minimal critical amount of data sets, they will be pushed in towards the benchmark repository, obviously in an anonymized way, but then we can start to compare ourselves to the benchmark data sets. His contact details are here. And that's also, I would say, a common request for input and feedback. We have a core project team that's working on the project itself, but we count and we use and we really call upon community feedback. So every time you find the possible improvement or a bug or something you want to add, or in terms of guidance, you're much welcome to share that with us through the different channels that we have, and we take that into account as well. What we're working on in the next couple of months is adding OWASP references to the different parts of the model, adding more on like an online version of this assessment tool, hopefully also integrated with that benchmark data. Also count on mapping some of the, I would say, activities on security controls that are typically part of regulations, and so on. Also, each year we organize a SAMM user summit. We're probably going to do one this fall or autumn together with the San Francisco Global AppSec. So those are the plans for the future. With that, so we have a Slack channel. We have our GitHub page. Those are the ones really where we can capture that. And let me also push towards, so if you want to get updates, there's a newsletter. We've not done this alone. Besides John and myself, we have lots of other people from other parts in the world that have contributed to this. This is a core team, but there's also other volunteers as well. Very grateful also for the donations of our sponsors. And if you want to sponsor us, obviously you're more than welcome to do that. And with that, let me go to the website itself. So the best part to start is owaspsamm.org, and there you'll end up on this home page. Now, here you'll find the different steps typically that you can do. So getting started, doing an assessment, compare yourself with the benchmark, but also you'll find the model. And so the model itself is here. Here you can see the full model. You have 5 business functions. For instance, here, if you look at governance, education, guidance, you have the different streams. So there's stream training and awareness, there's a stream organization and culture. And if you go through that, you can see the different maturity levels and the activities in that. So maturity level 1, education and guidance, basic awareness training, role-based training on level 2, having a security knowledge overall and a formal training program and so on is level 3. So that's actually how you can browse through the model itself. Now, how do you do that and how do you start that? Like I said in the beginning, if you go to the home page, the getting started is actually where you should get started if you're new to SAMM. And here you have at the bottom the different steps that I pointed out. So you have to prepare yourself. So there's different activities, resources there. You can assess where you are, you set your targets, and so on. So the different steps are explained in here. So that's, I would say, the most important parts of the website itself, on how to do that. The model, there's guidance here as well, especially, for instance, also on Agile, if you want. We have a couple of community-related pages where one of the most important ones is the frequently asked questions. So if you have a certain question and that you think should be on there, feel free to share that as well. Now, the best way to reach out to us is through Slack. And here's a direct link to the Slack channel. If you're not on the OWASP Slack workspace yet, there is a link in here to actually get an invitation. Once this will load, you can fill in your email address, you get an invite, you'll get invited to the Slack workspace, and there actually there's project-SAMM. Obviously, immediately start that in your Slack workspace, then it will be easier for you to find it back. But here actually is where I would say the most part of our community is active, and where if you have any questions, you can post them here, and there's much interaction. Not only that, if you go here at the top of that Slack channel, you have 4 pinned URLs. So you have obviously you have the website, but you also have the GitHub page where we have the different underlying repositories, and we have the core repository with all the YAML files, and anytime you change something there, it's pushed towards the website. Here you can also find back the latest release. Actually, we're on 2.0.4, and actually here, and I'll show you later on, you can also download the latest toolbox or spreadsheet. With that, you also have the Google Drive, which is on the top part here. And the Google Drive, this is a shared Google Drive where you find all presentations, past repository of user days, some summits, mappings, the roadmap, and so on. So also some training here as well. So we recently did some trainings, but we also have the trainer package also available here. So you're much if you want to do that within your organization, obviously feel free to do that, but make sure to read the README first, which is in here. And then last but not least, and we'll probably hopefully also be adding this recording to our YouTube channel as well, but we do have a OWASP YouTube channel with past recordings and sessions. So make sure you subscribe to that and hit the bell that you get like a notification whenever we release something new. So that's actually how I would say the overall set of documents and features and tools are available. Now, as a last part of what I wanted to show, and then I'll give the word to John, the SAMM assessment itself. How do you do that? There's different ways to do that, but here is a link to a self-assessment Microsoft Excel toolbox. This is actually the one that you should be downloading. This is pointing to the latest release in the GitHub. And once you download that, you'll have downloaded the toolbox or this Excel spreadsheet. Now it has like a front page, and then there's a couple of tabs in there. There's the interview tab, scorecard, roadmap, and roadmap chart. And how does it work? If you, for instance, go to education and guidance, do your employees or your staff members, do they have like training? Well, maybe at least half of them. Is it training customized? Here, this is linked to the second activity, measure level 2 activity. Well, maybe for some. Do you have a learning management system? And do you track employee training or certification? Well, maybe you don't. Well, that's not obviously not bad, no worries. So once you fill this in, you see that there's a rating popping up here. Actually, this is our maturity level, the maturity level of the first stream of education and guidance. So if we also fill in organization and culture, for instance, you have security champions for at least half of your teams, and you have a software security center of excellence for the entire organization, maybe like imagine that, and we started implementing a centralized portal, then you filled in the security practice of education and guidance, and you know that you're at the maturity 1.25 out of a maximum of 3. That's actually how you do your assessment. And that's I would say, through that spreadsheet. There's also a scorecard where you can then look at how that reflects. Obviously, we've only filled in one, I would say, one security practice, so there's not much going on there. But here in the roadmap, you can also start working on improving that in later cycles. And once you have done that, you also have your roadmap chart that's going to change. So that's in a nutshell how that toolbox works. Obviously, much more information is available about trainings, or if you want to figure out or more details, join us one of our next community calls. That's really what I wanted to show, and I think let's hand it over to John. John, you will go.
So a couple of comments before I jump over to sharing my screen. On the Excel workbook, and you notice the roadmap, basically it just go to the roadmap tab, I guess is the thing I was thinking about. By default, you'll see that there's a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And the way that the workbook is set up is that unless you change something here, the assumption is that you're not going to change the way you're doing things, so the maturity will stay steady. So that just kind of shows you, if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll stay at this level. That makes sense. If you then decide we want to set up a phased roadmap, and you might decide the first phase is 3 months, the second phase is the next 3 months. You can set whatever timelines you want for these. And then you decide what you would like for your coverage to become by the end of that roadmap phase. And then you can see the conditional formatting is set up so that if you're targeting an improvement, it turns green. If you're predicting a reduction, it will actually turn red to show that you're actually planning or predicting a reduction in maturity. And it allows you then to look and see how across the phases of your roadmap where you've got improvements planned. And one of the things that you saw, it was like the very first FAQ question was, do I have to get to 1 out of 1 at level 1 before I start level 2? And I would say a pretty emphatic no. If you recognize your baseline is that we're at about half in the first activity, in the level 1 activity, and we're not really doing the level 2 activity, then you could look at this as kind of a diffusion model and say we want to get from, in the level 1 activity, we want to get from about half to almost everybody's doing it, while at the same time introducing the level 2 activity to those who've already been doing the level 1. And that way you can have this kind of a wave as the more mature practices diffuse through the organization. The other comment I wanted to make was about the train the trainer, of which I am somewhat proud. So the idea is that we have a 1-day training class, and that class is intended to help people who are planning to run assessments understand how to do that. The train the trainer class is a 2-day session, which is intended to help people who intend to present the 1-day training learn how to do that. So under the grant that Seba mentioned briefly, I developed and presented the train the trainer class, and we made some improvements based on feedback we received, and that's what's published there. But it is like the model itself, it's a growth stage. So if you're interested in starting to do assessments, the best thing to do would be to attend one of the classes. They're very often in conjunction with global OWASP conferences. When you get to the point where you would like to start training your own assessors, then you might take part in the train the trainer class in order for you then to be at the front of the room presenting the training. Okay, thank you for that. Now I'll go ahead and continue with sharing my screen briefly. Now, SAMWISE, as I mentioned when we introduced it briefly earlier, SAMWISE is not an extension beyond the Excel workbook. In fact, it has only a subset of its capabilities, but this is meant to be a starting point to get to having an application-based assessment system. On the homepage for the SAMWISE app, you can see that what you can do right now are enter responses for a single assessment, visualize your maturity results. So we've got some dynamic graphs that will let you see your maturity results for that single assessment. And then in the visualization page, we have the ability to import one previous assessment and do a side-by-side in the graphs. So that is of course less than you can do with the Excel workbook, but that was the minimum product we were able to put together before Datacom told us we needed to go do paying work instead. The intent here is to support the SAMM project, which is mentioned. If you look at our About tab, it basically says, what are we looking at? And this is one of the things I want to point out. What we would really like to do is enhance the capabilities of the application to rival and even excel what you can do in the roadmap workbook, to the point of being able to have multiple phase roadmaps and showing the progressive graphs the same as you see in the Excel workbook. To be able to, obviously, to do that, do it as a look back. You can do it as planning, saying, I just did an assessment, I want to plan my future milestones. You can also say, I did an assessment today, I would like to compare that with the assessments from 3, 6, and 9 months ago. So instead of being able to compare with one, we'd love to be able to let you do multiple. And then this is where I think we'll really see the value as the two tracks come together, is when we have the SAMM benchmark data model done, and there's a published API to allow you to access benchmark aggregate data as well as submit benchmark data sets, to be able to do that from within the application. So that once you've done an assessment, you can say, I would like to compare myself with the global benchmark for financial services companies. Pull that data set through the benchmark projects API and view that within the application. Similarly, what we would really like to get to is where you can complete an assessment, look through the visualization, say, yes, that is where we are today. I would like to contribute that to the benchmark, and simply to click a button, which will de-identify your assessment containing only your metadata about your industry, size, number of applications, and so on, along with your responses, and submit that to the review queue for the benchmark project. So our goal is to get to the point where all of that would be within the tool. Of course, we are not there today. What we have right now is the ability to go through the SAMM interview questionnaire in a single page application. Now, the application is written in JavaScript. It's based on Survey.js. So you'll notice it looks an awful lot like, say, a SurveyMonkey survey. They have similar roots. So all of that information you see and can enter in the interview tab of the Excel workbook is presented here. The question, and since Seba was talking about education and guidance, we can look at that one. So for the level one question, do you require employees to have SDLC training? If you'd like to review the qualifying criteria, you can expand that. You can see, because it does take up a good bit of room, we make it so that that can be collapsed. And then you can select one of the 4 values. And you can also type comments, which are in column, I want to say I, of the interview spreadsheet tab. So we've given you the ability to complete an interview here in this app. right now, as a very intentional step, we've decided that everything is run locally. So this, you can see, is actually running locally. I just started it up. It's an NPM app. I just started it. We have not yet, but we intend to host the ability to go to a URL on the OWASP SAMM website and start the app. But all that will really do is download the JavaScript so you can run it locally. And the only option that you have for saving right now is to save your responses to your local file system in a JSON file. So your responses do not go anywhere other than your local system. In the future, as I talked about the bigger vision for this application, we would like to follow the model that actually ThreatDragon does, one of the other OWASP projects. So you can go to an enterprise site somewhere on your intranet, start the application, complete your responses, and when you save your responses, they will go into your organization's repository of assessments. Once they're in the repository, another objective will be to create a sister application that will let you have a benchmark and scorecards to look at which of your projects have done assessments, what was their baseline score, how are they progressing against their roadmap targets, and all of that can be looked at as a dashboard for the organization. So that's really where we'd like to see this go. And this initial application gets us that core engine. As I go through the questions, I make some choices, and I'm not going to go through all 90 of them, but let's say just for this practice, and for a couple of the others, I'll go ahead and make some arbitrary selections. And it would help if I did not lose track of where I was. So I've done strategy and metrics, portions of strategy. There we go. I knew I still had more to do. Live demos. So rather than go through the entire assessment, I've just filled out the answers for a single business function. If I then go to results, I will see a summary of the responses I have submitted. So of the 18 responses I gave, I had 2 no's, 6 partials, 5 at least halves, and 5 yes for alls. And then that worked out to be a maturity for the entire business function of 1.5 out of 3. And then I can see for my individual practices that I got to 1.75 on 2 of them and 1.0 out of 3 on the third. We have the radar chart, spider graph, so that you can see right away as you start to pull together your assessment responses, you can come here and dynamically check and see, oh, how does that look? And as you can go back and forth between the assessment and the visualization. When you're done, you can say, yep, I want to save my responses. And then the second option I have is that I can say, I want to select another one JSON file against which I would like to compare this. Since this visualization is very useful, and these images might be something you'd want to pull into a report, we've added the export graphs function. So it will generate a PDF with the graphs as you see them, just sequentially in the document. That allows you to capture those, and then you can grab the images out and use them in other documents as you wish. That is where we are, and I see I pretty much hit time. We are at 10 till the hour.
Yes. All right. Thank you, John. Indeed. And I'll also continue sharing my screen again. So it's time for Q&A. Just before that, I just also wanted to point out where you find OWASP SAMM, obviously on our GitHub. and there it's one of the repositories, SAMM-wise, right here. So if you want to start it out right here, then that's where you find the latest and greatest version of SAMM-wise. So with that, we'll open the floor for Q&A.
All right, thanks for the session, John and Seba. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. A question: the class yesterday was cancelled. When will the next training session be available? For the trainer, that is, I assume.
Most probably it will take place as part of the next Global AppSec in San Francisco. Now that will be an in-person, I would say, conference. So I'm assuming also that the training will be in person at that point in time. With that said, from time to time, we also get questions from other organizations to do a training. For instance, I did one a couple of months ago in Finland, where we were invited by the ISACA and the OWASP chapters there locally. So if you have a group of 10 people or more that you think would benefit from having a training, either remote or on site, reach out to us and we'll make it happen.
All right.
I apologize, Seba. Was the class that was scheduled, was that the 1 day or the train the trainer?
This so typically we schedule the 1-day trainings, and so it was scheduled for Global AppSec Dublin here, but unfortunately there were not enough registrations for the training to continue.
So if you're looking for a subtropical winter vacation, the next offering will actually be in 3 weeks in Auckland, New Zealand at the OWASP New Zealand Day conference.
Exactly.
Now the conference will be live streamed and you're welcome to register for that. I should have plugged it more, but the training is actually face-to-face.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks for the answers. Another question. If we are building an AppSec program into a new team, is SAMM a good place to start?
You mean with a new team, is SAMM a good place to start? Yes, of course, it's a good way to start, but make sure that SAMM is not, I would say, the goal. It's your tool and your framework to improve your activities. And there's definitely a couple of like really basic foundational activities in SAMM that will kickstart your roadmap. One example of them being the education guidance, but there's others in there as well. The threat modeling part, the testing part, making sure that you have a good build and deployment system in place, that you have the plugins for adding tools to those CI/CD pipelines. So there's definitely a couple of, I would say, foundational activities in there that for a new team would be recommended.
I guess a slightly different take on the answer. I'll go ahead and assume that you're talking about an organization that is doing things, has built products, is selling software, but hasn't stood up a team before. In that situation, and this is actually a place where I've used SAMM, it's a great way to take stock of the good things that are going on and to make a conscious decision to adopt some of them as the organization's standard. So if you think we would really like for there to be a consistent threat modeling practice across the organization, and in the process of doing a SAMM assessment, you learn that one team has been doing threat modeling and they've got some really great threat models, they've got good scripts, they have a nice cadence for doing it, adopt it. And then when you get to that level 2 and say, do we have a consistent process? Yes, we do. We took that one and applied it to the whole organization.
Indeed. So John answered it for a question where you have like already an organization and other practices. I assumed like a greenfield, like totally new startup. So, but you can use SAMM in both situations.
All right, cool. Thanks for that. A question I have, what are some of the common pitfalls you see when an organization adopts SAMM?
I would say to be probably too ambitious in applying the whole framework to everything at the same time. I would say one of the best practices to start small with 1 or 2 teams that typically maybe represent the rest of the organization, and go for what we call like the very basic adoption of SAMM. Like what are you doing? What kind of like easy steps can we add to your practice, and start tracking that with SAMM and demonstrating how SAMM can be helpful for your organization. And from there, build out your practice towards the different other teams. So, but starting off like with a full implementation for everything at the same time, that's going to be hurtful.
One other one that I see quite a bit is too much of a focus on the raw score. And really it's a misunderstanding of the purpose of the tool, but it's important and can be a stumbling block right out of the gate if you aren't able to communicate to everyone that there are no repercussions for having a current score that's not great, that we are not using this as a way to decide which teams are better than others and that you'll somehow be punished later. It has to be very clearly communicated that we want to understand where our gaps are so that we can work toward improving. And to make it very clear that what the most important thing, the most valuable output from our engagement with a team is we want honest input. And so I very often will get involved in an organization. They'll say, well, can't we go ahead and count this sort of thing we're doing so we can get a better score? The score doesn't matter. And overcoming that, and then as Seba alluded to, the other flip side of thinking that we have got to get to 3.0. Anything less is a failure. That is also not true. So it's these, I see those as big pitfalls of not really understanding the right way to think about a SAMM maturity score and targets.
Hey, that's very insightful feedback, I would say, as I think a lot of organizations are aiming for the highest score immediately. I want to be at 3, but start low and be honest with yourself as a team or a squad.
Now, if you want to have as an internal metric how close you are coming to your target score as a measure of progress, that's useful. But your target score is probably not going to be a 3. Typically, I've seen a target aggregate being around a 2.2.
All right, cool. Thanks, John. Maybe one final question. I see there are a lot of possibilities to contribute to the SAMM, like for example via crowding, via data sets, via all other things. Any additions to that? Like for example, can contributors help on the SAMM Wise application?
Oh yes, please.
Oh yes.
You're more than welcome to indeed to help us out. SAMM has become quite a big project, lots of things in motion. I think especially now we're working with on the benchmark, so Brian can definitely use some help there with the MVP implementation. There's lots of stuff already going. So the best page to actually go through is the OWASP SAMM.org community contributing page. We do get this question a lot. So here's different pointers to what you can do and how you can reach out to us. And then I would say the best way to also contribute is to reach out to us on the Slack channel, and there we'll put you in contact with different people within the core team to get you started.
All right, cool. You heard it, OWASP community. Okay, I think it's fine to wrap up. I want to thank you, Seba, John, for the insightful session. And then in about 30 seconds, we'll head over to the next session, which is about abusing Kubernetes.
All right.
All right.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you, everyone who's listening.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you, John. Bye, everybody.